So hello everybody, welcome to the seminar, to the I³O seminar. So this week is a special week because we're broadcasting this from Viña del Mar, from the coast to Santiago. We're very happy, we're very excited. So I don't know what else. So I'm gonna leave you with Eija, right? Eija, that's pronounced. She's gonna present about humanitarian logistics and supply chain management. So thank you so much. And go ahead.
Hola, buenos días. That's pretty much what I'm going to say in Spanish today to have a more fruitful lecture on humanitarian logistics. So my name is Eija Meriläinen, and I am a doctoral student at the Henken School of Economics, and within their Humanitarian Logistics Institute. And this lecture is going to be mainly an introductory lecture to humanitarian logistics, and the purpose is more or less to give the idea of what the differences are between humanitarian logistics and the basic commercial one, and why it is important and why it might be interesting. And basically, before I actually start more the introductory part, I give a little bit of information about myself. So, and then from that, I kind of approach to the humanitarian logistics literature, but it might explain a bit of like my first point of view for supply chain management. So I studied industrial engineering and management at Aalto University, and especially the engineering school. And after my studies, and during my studies, I mainly worked with fast-moving consumer goods, so like dairy and toilet tissue paper. So that's why my focus and view on supply chain management is more like from the retail sector and fast-moving consumer goods side. So that explains also my view, maybe like when I explain what the supply chain is to me, then compared to someone from the car industry might have a totally different view on it. But and further, after working in the industry, I wanted to go back to academia, and that's how I ended up in Christchurch, New Zealand, 3 years after the 2010 and 2011 earthquakes. And we studied there the collaboration of different actors in the reconstruction phase of the disaster. And that's where my experience and interest in sudden onset disasters like earthquakes kind of started. And then I started the PhD in Finland with the Humanitarian Logistics Institute. But that's pretty much about my background. And now I'm going to go to the introductory lecture part. And I have a lot of academic references there, and hopefully that isn't boring, but I thought to give a sort of introduction to also the key pieces of literature if you wish to go back to it. And if I speed up, you can tell me to slow down the presentation, and also feel free to interrupt with questions, whatever. But so, humanitarian logistics and supply chain management. This is pretty much the view that like the media picture of what disasters and humanitarian logistics is about. It's providing aid for people in need. And there's the Galvugo volcano eruption picture of a natural disaster, and as well there's a picture of the Nepal earthquake that happened this weekend. And at the moment, I think 10,000 people are estimated to have deceased in that. And then also, it's not only about natural disasters, but there are a lot of man-made disasters that, like, while, for example, the prolonged Syrian crisis is sometimes in the news, it's not often thought how much logistics and supply chain effort is put into maintaining the refugee camps by aid organizations and other governments. So that is part of it. And while humanitarian logistics can be other things as well, and not only about aid organizations, usually the cases, case studies and things revolve around humanitarian organizations, and especially the big actors like International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Oxfam, World Food Programme, and partially because of obtaining data, but also they actually are really big players. But that's pretty much how it looks like. And with but there are like similar issues that related to humanitarian aid and disaster relief are discussed within different labels in the academic literature. So disaster operations management is one. I haven't that much looked into that stream of literature, but it's sort of, then it's called HADR by some authors, and whereas these discuss pretty much the similar issues than humanitarian logistics and supply chain management, or the operations side. Whereas disaster risk reduction and community resilience literatures, they are kind of overlapping with each other, and they focus more on not the organizations that come in and help, but how the actual community that faces a disaster can recover. So it's a bit different aspect. And then there's the humanitarian logistics and supply chain management literature, which is sort of like, well, the reference I give here is Kovacs and Spence, 2007, and Kovacs is my supervisor, so also for that reason I subscribe to this title, but also there's, for example, a journal on this title, and this stream of literature is categorized to two different streams, like disaster relief and continuous aid. But most of the literature is discussing disaster relief operations. But if one wants to really read about disasters and how to respond to that, climate change is something that can't be totally taken out of the context, because climate change adaptation and climate change related disasters are going to be there. For example, droughts, floods, things like this. So if you think about how to prepare for a disaster, you have to think about what the cause is as well. So in that sense, that cannot be totally ruled out of the picture and just focusing on the event of a disaster, the hazard. But so I'll be talking mainly about disaster relief for the remaining of the lecture. And I will be focusing on the humanitarian organizations, because that's what the focus of the literature currently is, mainly in this stream of literature. And while one should keep in mind that there are also other actors, army, governments, they pitch in to help their citizens. But so it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be other actors, but this is the focus I'm going to take mainly in this lecture. The literature in humanitarian logistics and supply chain management it's said to be relatively new. Like this Van Wassenhoven article, or based on the Placket Memorial speech, is like said to be one of the founding pieces of literature of humanitarian logistics and supply chain management literature. But the stream of literature has expanded quite fast, and the idea of humanitarian logistics and supply chain management in general, or I might refer to humanitarian logistics for the remaining of the lecture. So the idea behind it it's quite well emphasized in the first sentence of the Van Wassenhoven paper, like the abstract sentence. And the idea is that this paper builds on the idea that private sector logistics can and should be applied to improve the performance of disaster logistics. And the idea was that in the humanitarian sector, a lot of effort and resources are wasted when they don't apply the newest and best practices of the commercial side that have been developed, and that they could do things better should they apply more of the principles and practices that have been found to be good in the commercial side, and vice versa potentially. But so this was the idea, to bring in business side insights to make the more efficient and effective operations in disaster relief. And the quite often quoted figure is that disaster relief is about 80% logistics. Is from the same paper, and it has been asked whether it truly is that, but at least it should be emphasized that when there's a disaster, when the roads are broken, the infrastructure is broken, and the humanitarian organizations or other actors want to help the most vulnerable ones, the ones most in need, and they might be in the remote villages where there are no roads and that are totally stranded of the world, then the way of combining different modes of transportation and ways of figuring out what the people need and how to match that need, that comes to logistics and supply chain management, and the role of logistics and supply chain management is important in disaster relief operations. However, whether it's 80% logistics it's debatable, but it's vital in any case. But one question that can be raised is that as at the moment a lot of humanitarian organizations are going towards 3PLs, having DHL or other companies do part of their logistics tasks. So the question becomes, if we would assume that it's mainly logistics that humanitarian aid is about, then what is the purpose of humanitarian organizations? But these are debatable issues, but logistics is important. And because we're talking about disaster relief, I'm not going to read through all these definitions of hazard or disaster. You may read if you wish to. But the idea is that a lot of authors redefine what disaster is for them. And also they might go without defining it and refer to catastrophe, hazard, disaster, a bit like more interlinkedly and without actually having a particular idea of it. And for me, I think hazard is the event of a volcano eruption, whereas disaster is it when the hazard's impact is affecting people. And like that's how I like to see disaster as like it is the impact of a hazard that is collectively experienced by people, humans. Whereas there are other definitions. And then like their disasters or hazards have been categorized by, again, in the Van Westenhoven paper, to sudden onset and slow onset disasters, whereas sudden onset could be like earthquake and slow onset maybe a drought or similar, and then man-made and natural disasters. Man-made being like conflict situation, complex disasters like this, and natural being then, for example, well, again, earthquakes. Whereas then some authors say that there's no natural disaster exists, especially based on this definition that if it's like when hazard comes to social context, it becomes a disaster. So can there ever be a natural disaster because the disaster is impacting the people who are most vulnerable most, and is that a natural condition or a societal one? But there's one debate again. But now that we have defined a disaster, we can talk about disaster relief, and that's referring to Kovac and Stens, but a bit and other papers trying to figure out how the authors categorize the phases of disaster relief. We did a paper on the reconstruction and trying to figure out what reconstruction is on the humanitarian logistics terms, and well, this is not the high scientific result, but we figured that most of the authors sort of saw that there is an event of a disaster or hazard that causes the cycle to start, the cycle of disaster relief. And while the different phases are interlinked, many of them consider it important to separate between phases, so that right after disaster event is usually for around 48 hours. There's a search and rescue phase that is not included here, and that's usually the people. First responders are usually actually the people who are impacted. So the people are actually helping each other, digging each other out of, let's say, ruins of buildings, and while the government is trying to potentially enter, but there's not. Or aid organizations can't enter really because they might mess up the search and rescue phase. Whereas after this time, depending on a disaster, there becomes the immediate response where the organizations that are actors are trying to cater for the basic needs of the people, and that's providing water, shelter, food. And slowly this should lead to a recovery, and where the people impacted by disaster would be able to get their lives back to normal, not the way it used to be, but at least some semblance of normality, balance. And this is the idea is basically that the recovered state would be better prepared for future disasters, especially if this is let's say earthquake-prone zone or anything. And quite often people talk about this as a resilience, that basically that you enhance the resilience of the community or the region by, for example, building codes that the houses are built a bit better so that they resist. But this can be also other things than just the building codes. Any questions so far? So that were the phases of disaster relief, and then what the aim of disaster relief is, and this is mainly from the purpose of the organizations helping. So purpose of disaster relief for the people who are actually experience a disaster might be different, but the idea for the organizations is that to aid people in their survival. And the organizations that are like, be it foreign armies or be it humanitarian organizations, they subscribe to humanitarian principles and have agreed to follow them. And this depends, like a lot of organizations list a few humanitarian principles on their websites, but the amount that they announce can vary from 3 to 5. But the main principles that everyone says that they go by are the humanity, neutrality, and impartiality. So the idea is that while none of us are unbiased, and we have a sort of inbuilt biases, they at least claim that, and they will try to alleviate suffering of all people that they face, and especially the most vulnerable ones, without taking sides in the conflict. So that's pretty much the idea of the humanitarian principles. And it's not really easy because there's like the idea with aid in general, and there's a lot of debate about it and critique that I might come into later. But there's a principle of that not doing any harm, so that you're, for example, if you bring aid to a region, like food aid to a region that has farmers and small shopkeepers, if you bring in too much food aid, you can actually distort the market prices, and so that the farmers that are locally still having a job might not have a job anymore after this, because their like work is not worth value because of the food aid. So it's a tight balance, and that's especially something that has been raised up in continuous aid. And then one issue is to resume dignity, because people are not merely victims, but they are also survivors of the disaster. So then they should be treated also as one. So how do you like respect them as dignified people while you're providing aid? And this can be, for example, from the small minute details like male aid workers providing underwear for women in a different culture. That can be something that, you know, you're in a position of having to receive the aid. You might feel really uncomfortable and really sort of stripped of your dignity because you don't have a chance to complain. And how do you do that? How do you balance these? But in general, the idea is that humanitarian organizations have resources that like can help people in the that are in the disaster zones, so they can provide water more efficiently than we could if we started pulling up 1.5 liter water bottles and shipping them somewhere. Humanitarian organizations certainly know how to do this better, and that's why they are needed. But at the same time, they struggle that providing the aid in a way that actually helps the people, not only in the short term but also in the long term. And these are 2 pictures I have liked so dearly that I haven't wanted to let them go. But this is, I'm sure that you have seen more like better views of supply chain before, but I think it essentializes what a supply chain is to me. So even if we study quite often supply chain networks nowadays more and more, and operations more widely, we still have this view of a pipeline of a supply chain where there is the focal company that has suppliers and buyers, and in your idea is to, in the end, serve the end customer, the buyer in the end of the chain. And there are streams of information, goods, and then money as well. And more, even if there are different varieties, usually the goods flow downstream, money comes upstream, and then there's information exchange on both sides. And to improve the efficiency, you actually have usually good logistics, you assume a stable state, you have information systems to share information and better guess what the customer wants. You sort of, then the customer might not actually be a king, but you're still trying to provide for a customer at the end. And so this is, and for me, supply chain is about matching supply and demand. But this is, again, if you see, there's a carrots and something supply chain. So this is from my thinking from the more of this fast-moving consumer goods side. But still, the same principles apply. So this is what the supply chain in the status quo is for me. And this other beautiful picture emphasizes the difference between the previous one. So now, instead, first thing, you don't have any more a market with consumers, customers. You have their disaster region or like affected community that has needs instead of demands. They don't have information systems to deliver your information about what they need. So how you go on about assessing what they actually need is like you have your experience as a humanitarian organization of what people might need in similar situations. You might have census data on what the region was before the disaster. Then you can go around and figure out what the impact has been, how many of the people actually stayed in the region, and or where they went, if they like went away from the disaster region in the aftermath. How many people have died, how many have just gone. So you don't have the data of people, and then you try to also through needs assessment forms kind of get the idea what the needs of the people are in the aftermath, what they actually eat. So providing rice to people who don't have access to cooking it, or that don't have usually used to using it in their diet, might not be smart. So this needs assessment and sort of prior knowledge can help you to figure out what the needs are, but you still don't have a customer. So we're talking quite often about end beneficiary, but that sort of also takes away that if you talk about the people who are impacted by disaster as just beneficiaries whose needs you're trying to get, instead of people who actually have businesses or had businesses before the disaster, it gives a bit of a wrong idea. But that's one of the differences. And the thing is, but you do have marketing activities, and that's towards the donors. So what usually happens is when you're trying to supply to that need that you see, humanitarian organizations have these long-term warehouses, but with, for example, high-energy cookies and things like this that they can then provide in the immediate response. However, they do also have try to use local supplies as much as possible, not to distort the markets, because bringing in external goods to a country, and instead of supporting that economically, might do more harm than good. So you're matching the supplies from your international warehouses, international supply, local supply, and with the need that you assume. But there's again the thing that there are multiple humanitarian organizations. They have like an overlapping set of skills, and then nowadays they have formed logistics clusters so that per one humanitarian organizations is in each disaster more of like the leader of water issues, another one with food, and another one with shelter. So there's a bit of this task division so that they would better able to make sure that you don't serve the same people with the same sort of thing. And so they coordinate a bit, but yet because everyone is trying to get money from the donors to actually answer that need, So they're competing over the donors. So you can see the advertisement in the TV that some of the NGOs, they try to pledge money for the disaster, for example, for a particular purpose. And that is problematic in the sense that first of all, humanitarian organizations, they want to exist also in the future, so they want them to get the money, preferably. And then, but that's not the biggest issue, but there's like, for example, if the donors usually don't, especially private ones, don't want to give money to a preparedness program, but when they see a disaster hit, then they are willing to give money. They have the empathy for the people and they're willing to give the money. And even if, like, for example, the preparation for like the earthquake in Nepal might have been more useful than actually the money like spent now, because everyone is trying to help in haste, that doesn't often happen. So this is when humanitarian organizations get funds when there is a disaster, like from volunteers, not only, but then now if you have the different organizations competing for different purposes, and for example one organization is like saying that we will use this money to give water to Nepal, then in that case then they have the money earmarked to water in Nepal. And if what they find out is that they have plenty of water but no shelters, you still have to provide them water for Nepal instead of, for example, preparing for a next disaster. So so the organizations are competing over the donors' attention, and because there's the issue that you have someone, the beneficiaries that you're trying to represent and their needs that you're trying to answer, while it's the donors who give the money. So who are you responding to? Are you responding to, like, are you accountable to the donors? And that's quite often how it's seen, that you are accountable to providing what the donors wanted you to provide, not necessarily what the actual end beneficiaries would have needed. But so you're trying to balance this. And then, of course, the NGOs are not working only in collaboration with each other, but also with the local governments and military. And that can be problematic. For example, a faith-based humanitarian organization who doesn't want to work with military under any circumstances, and they should help the same people. But here's more of a summary slide. So of the key words here, that first of all, like compared to normal supply chains in steady state, you here have sort of a quite quick trigger in sudden onset disasters, and then usually, for example, even if the disaster itself or a hazard could be the trigger, then usually you need countries need to issue a national state of emergency so that humanitarian organizations can come in with their own mandate. And here, for example, Chile, I think it's Alerta Roja, that basically then does the national level, triggers the national level rescue responses. And then the main difference that you don't talk about demand but needs. And the general conditions for broken roads to no electricity, they are different. Donors, you are trying to answer to the donors and get money from them to provide something that is needed. And then staff rotation is one of the key things that, for example, I think Finnish Red Cross, they have 4-week rotation. So it means that when a disaster happens, first you dispatch one set of people for 4 weeks and then you change it. And usually you put the seasoned professionals first, but the turnover rate of the staff is really high. Some people, I think most people, would never return to a disaster relief mission. So you have these people who go there once in their life and never go back, and they never kind of share the information with others. And even you switch between the rotations, there's not that much information overlap. So you lose a lot of information in general in the whole knowledge of the organization, because the turnover is really high and there's the rotation. So you don't work with the normal supply chain management of a steady organization, and even a project organization, project supply chain could be. Yes?
Why do you do a rotation? Is there a reason behind it?
I think the idea is that basically people would burn out. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. To repeat the question, it was that basically, why do you do a rotation? And the answer would be that people would burn out. That they're, like, for example, I've heard that especially the first few weeks in a disaster setting, the people stay up overnight trying to establish the centers without electricity and come up with a sort of warehousing system in the middle of nowhere, and it's really exhausting, so they need to take. But in continuous aid, when there's a more stable project, then I think the aid workers stay for a longer time. And then there's a lot of actors involved that have different needs and how they want to interact. And then there are the beneficiaries that but who are actually also people who have jobs or had jobs, and who hopefully have jobs and livelihoods and houses and families and life. They're not just beneficiaries, so that you're trying to help them gain back their life. And then there's army, governments, volunteers, local and international NGOs, and local companies, that everyone in their own way try to sometimes help the people, and sometimes also help themselves. And while all of the actors sort of go usually in these situations with how level of empathy and trying to help the ones that are in need, they have the same humanitarian principles that they should follow, but they still trying to coordinate and collaborate is tricky. And one issue that is high in humanitarian logistics is that on the commercial side, you have a certain idea of what is a successful organization. And while I don't necessarily agree with it 100%, but profit is one way of actually measuring whether the company is being successful, whether it uses the resources efficiently to provide something that is needed. That is one way of seeing it. I don't totally agree with it, but on the commercial side, there are at least some measurements of how you think the company should act and whether it's doing what it's doing. But how do you do that in the humanitarian side, where you can't really put a price tag on a human life? So then the question is, how do you follow if the humanitarian organizations are actually short-term and long-term, providing the aid efficiently without wasting the resources and putting them into their own pockets, or things like this that have been questioned and doubted for them for doing. So, and who are they accountable for? Do the donors who donate the money go back to the humanitarian organizations and ask, did they get this? Or what they were providing aid for? And for this reason, one idea from the humanitarian community is the sphere standards. So the idea with this is that the organizations came together and thought about what is it that we're trying to provide and how could we do it more efficiently, and what is the minimum standards of the what we're providing. So you can find the Spheres project online, and they have they have put down a lot of things about everything from how much food person needs per day and how that could be provided, and and everything to how to provide shelter to things. And this is one attempt to make it more transparent what humanitarian organizations are doing, and also to provide more equal aid, because if in a refugee camp one organization provides huge tents and another one this doesn't even try to provide good care, so it'd be more equal for people to actually have the same standards that you apply to, and the humanitarian organizations would strive to the same thing. But then again, this is the minimum standards. So I think it's 3.5 square meters of living space that is in a refugee tent per person. So no, it cannot be that much. But like I remember that it was a really shockingly small space per person, and these sort of minimum standards, then they might give someone the idea that we're doing the right thing when we're providing the minimum standard, but while they are not actually thinking that is it feasible for people to live in, and is it solving the original problem? For example, we focus more on that we are providing refugee tents by the standards, but we're not much focusing on actually ending the conflict and putting the effort there that actually drives the people from their homes. So, but these are of course different things to actually focus the cause and then like provide a solution for the urgency. So it's a battle between these things, and sphere standards is one aim to provide at least some sort of transparency and accountability and sort of common ground for the humanitarian organizations. So here, this is my pretty much last slide, and I may have raised already quite some issues about critique on the humanitarian aid, and I still argue that while I think it's necessary that we not only that we also aid the people who are suffering the most and don't let the most vulnerable ones to actually become more and more vulnerable and just stand idly aside if we have the resources to help and have the capabilities to help. However, whether the money is going where it should be going and whether it's effectively helping the ones that it should be helped is one issue. And then, for example, like the Global Humanitarian Assistance, their report from 2014 says that it was $22 billion that were used to humanitarian assistance or like humanitarian response in 2013, and I think the figure could be higher, and I think it's rising all the more. But all the same, there's a lot of money involved. There are a lot of humanitarian organizations popping up, and but whether the money is helping and to the ones in need. And there's actually an online documentary called Where Did the Money Go? And it focuses on Haiti. And that's one of the examples of how there was a huge flux of money to humanitarian organizations. But people are still, now 5 years later, still living in tent cities in Haiti. And they are not, the humanitarian organizations are gone. And the money, it was unprecedented, but still, they still didn't help Haiti that much. And when people have been tracing the flows of money, where it went, and then quite a lot have pointed that a lot of the money circulated back to the donating countries in the form of, for example, not only in the case of Haiti, but otherwise, U.S. aid usually pledges gets a lot of money from the U.S. government and pledges to use that a certain percentage of or buying from the United States. So providing food aid from U.S. to a country X, or providing services. So quite a lot of this money then goes back to the aiding countries and aiding organizations that have Western workers. So that's though that's been questioned, that nowadays, why do they not employ the locals? Why do they work with Western workers that don't know the culture, don't know the context, and maybe they are claiming it's about corruption or things, but how are they any better? And for example, in the online documentary, you can see that there are next to a this tent camp, there's a fancy restaurant where the aid workers go to eat escargot. So there are issues with the humanitarian system. And then also some people think that if this is the causes, for example, at the same time as we are providing food aid, for example, continuous aid to some African countries, Eurozone has high tariffs for products coming from Africa. So you don't allow the people to export their goods, but you bring in food aid. So you're sort of trying to like be a good guy while you're actually, the system is rigged. So there are like a lot of issues with that, and another example is that these charity songs that you make for different diseases like AIDS or Ebola for latest, they have been criticized that like Ebola didn't become a huge epidemic after all, but the attention and the like sort of negative publicity that the whole continent of 54 countries gained in the process, where everyone was writing charity songs to help the African Ebola victims, while like not focusing on finding a solution, but they were trying to sort of, the African critique said that from their point of view it was sort of condescending that a European comes and come up with a charity song that no one wanted in Africa. They did want to help with the disease, or they wanted to like respond to the disease, but not like this, not by smudging their whole reputation. And this is the other side of the coin. And partially, like the aid is needed, and it's certainly helping people, but it should be done mindfully and like thinking about what you're actually trying to achieve. And if it's helping the most vulnerable ones in their survival, you should focus on doing that and thinking how to make that best happen. But if you want to know more about humanitarian logistics, I have here, like in the end, I have the references, academic references I used here. Otherwise, but then there are also internet websites like Log-Cluster and Relief Web that have information that you might be interested in, like humanitarian logistics for the practitioners. And then there's the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, and then various humanitarian organizations provide information on cases they have done and how they have helped. So, yeah. That's pretty much what I have to say now, and hopefully I didn't speak too fast. And if there are any questions,